Preston, I've been hearing some rumors. Some rumors that say maybe that you might be switching your allegiances this college football season to a certain team in Lawrence, Kansas, being the Kansas Jayhawks. What do you have to say to that?
That's exactly what you just said it was. It's a rumor, and the rumor will never actually go anywhere. EMA for life, baby.
Preston Graber joins me. My name is Josiah Wonnell on the Power and Light Podcast, episode 43. And today we are previewing the Kansas Jayhawks football season, something that was not usually very entertaining. Rarely ever. But now, Kansas football, something to talk about. We're very excited. It's going to be quite the year, I'm hoping, as a KU fan, but I'm joined by K-State fan Preston Graber, as I previously mentioned. All right, as we start off the show, let's start with our Rock Chalk rundown. And this is just a quick reminder that just a couple seasons ago, Lance Leipold's first year coming in, replacing Les Miles, 2-10 season. Preston, talk about the leaps and bounds that Kansas football has made since that opening season.
Yeah, well, obviously the opening season was far from perfect, but seeing the roster come along, I think is the biggest development. Because, Daniels went down, but, still having success with Jason Bean and, Cole Ballard every now and then. That's crazy to see.
Yeah, for sure. It's insane that last year Kansas football had not only a winning record, but also a bowl game win, something that would not have been a huge deal, or not been conceivable, better said, just a few years ago. Today, we're going to be talking about the offense, the defense, key additions to this team, as well as our predictions for this year's season. And I'm trusting that Preston, even though he is a K-State football fan, will be fair with his guesses. But he also realizes that there's that circled deal right there on the schedule for Kansas football. We'll talk about the schedule in a little while. That's what you have to look forward to today. But Preston, I had the pleasure of attending media days at Kansas football indoor facilities, their new facilities they're building, and we started at their meeting room, the place where the players watch film and everything. And I don't know if this is a secret or not, so I'm sorry, but I see there on the side, on the right-hand side of the room, there's a big schedule of all of the games that are set up. And the games in blue are home games, the games in gray are away games. But there's one game that's red, and that game is K-State football. Preston, why does Kansas care so much about that game, and why do you think that game was highlighted?
Well, I would have to assume it's because of the recency of the Sunflower Showdown and honestly just the absolute destruction that K-State has put on KU over the past years. But also, I think it comes from the fact that KU has a fairly easy schedule this year. It's not like the easiest walkthrough schedule, but they don't play some of the best teams in the Big 12. And so I saw an ESPN article, and it walked through top 25 teams' potential ceiling record and low record. And KU's was undefeated, and their hardest game, like the clinching game, whatever, for that undefeated season was K-State, and the same way for K-State. K-State's was KU. So it's a big match for both the teams, but obviously K-State has a harder schedule, so it won't be circled as much as KU has it.
Yeah, it's going to be one of those games that is a determining factor in the Big 12 race, hopefully at least for both of our teams, because we understand that there's a lot that has to go into winning the Big 12, especially when you add these new teams this year. But yes, Kansas football, with the cycle that is set up for Big 12 scheduling, has a pretty easy schedule compared to future years. They don't have to play a team like Utah or even just some of the most difficult teams, but they get to play teams like Iowa State and Colorado that has a lot of hype behind them, but really is not going to be too much considering what we've seen so far at home. They were able to play both of those teams. It's going to be a great year for the coaching staff, but there's some major changes. Head coach Lance Leipold, we already mentioned, I believe is one of the best in the nation. Preston, what are your just exterior thoughts looking in at KU football and what Lance Leipold has done with this program? You already mentioned some of it, but just at an overall landscape, what has he done for college football?
Yeah, I mean, the overall turnaround of a not-so-great program, I think, is definitely what he did for college football, right? Like, he came in with a team that had a losing record for like so many years in a row. I don't even know the number. It was a lot though. And then he turned it around. He flipped it around. They had the one losing season, and then voila, started winning, got to a bowl game. And yeah, he's done an incredible job. He came in, he uses what he has very well. He plays to the talents on his team. He knows who his best players are. And yeah, there's those games where he just feeds Devin Neal the ball like 25 times, and that's his game plan, which is so smart. But yeah, you get a few stars, you can flip a team around pretty quickly.
Yeah, he's passionate about winning for sure. That's what he cares about. And the thing is, Lance Leipold has been part of a group that's traveled around and had success at every level in college football, at every division level. And that includes himself, defensive coordinator Brian Borland, who's still with Kansas. But this year, they made a new addition. They brought in Jeff Grimes, an offensive coordinator who had worked previously with the Baylor Bears. And he turned that offensive, especially the rushing game, around just a couple years ago. He brings in a lot of experience, especially in the tight ends room. He will also serve as the tight ends coach this year. But he replaces Andy Koltnicki, who is one of the most highly regarded offensive coordinators in the nation because of his unique offense, in the sense of there is so much motion in the Kansas offense, and it makes it so difficult for the defense. I was talking to Jalen Daniels just earlier this week, and he said, yeah, I wouldn't want to be on the other side of that offense. And I would say of all of the receivers said similar things. I would not want to be a defensive player watching all that motion. It's way too confusing. But Koltnicki's gone. He went to Penn State to serve as the offensive coordinator there in the Big Ten. But I'm pretty certain, based on what I've heard and what I've discussed with players, that this motion is going to be still in place. Preston, why is so much motion on the offensive side so important to production in the running and the passing game?
Yeah, I think motion's like specifically good for KU because you have Devin Neal, right? You put Grimm in motion, and then voila, the whole field's open, and you can run it straight up the middle. Because last year I saw KU doing a bunch of, the receiver runs over from the slot, stops at the guard, and then they run exactly back to where they were at. It tells you whether or not you're in zone coverage or man coverage. If the man follows you, they know that you're in man, and if not, you're in zone. And so that allows for a lot of breaking up the zone coverage. Then you know where to hit your spots. It opens a lot up, and you can audible to whatever. But motion really makes it difficult. Tires defenses out more than you realize.
For sure. And one of the things that I think sets them even more apart is that the receivers are ready.
Yeah.
They know what their assignments are, and that's what makes it happen, because if the receivers, running backs, tight ends don't know what they're doing, I mean, we see it all the time in the NFL with the offensive line, but it's even more important in this offense with those guys that they know what they're doing, they know when to break, they know when to cut. It's so important because if you don't do it correctly, there's a foul, a flag involved. Okay, we've talked all about why this offense is confusing. Let's talk about the motor behind the offense. Jalen Daniels returning after 2 straight seasons with major injuries. Preston, what is the outlook for Jalen Daniels, and what do you think the ceiling is for this guy?
Well, I think the ceiling is what it's always been, a Heisman candidate. But I think that the floor is him getting injured after 3 or 4 weeks and being out for the year. So I think this season seems like a big boom or bust season for the Jayhawks with Jalen Daniels. But if he can stay healthy, I'm excited to see what KU can do. I think that when it rolls around where KU comes to K-State, that could be a really big game. I honestly think it could be 2 top 10 teams. I think we can both still be undefeated by then, realistically. And if that's the case, then we're probably facing each other in a Big 12 championship come whenever that is. Yeah.
Yeah, and at the same time, they're also playing for those spots, those very coveted spots in the college football playoff, which I think is the ceiling. We'll talk about what the schedule looks like for both teams. We'll be previewing K-State on our next episode. But one of those things is that KU football legitimately could be a college football playoff candidate because of the expansion to 12 teams this year. I think it's difficult. I don't think it's a guarantee by any stretch of the imagination, but I think it's definitely possible, and I think Preston would agree with me on that. All right, let's talk about the running back position. You've got Devin Neal, who's the obvious star. He's the lone returning 1,000-yard rusher last year when he came in for the Big 12, and he showed up. When Jalen Daniels went out, when the offensive players, the quarterbacks, that were offensive that had a lot of injuries show up, like Jason Bean as well. He stepped up. He had an incredible rushing season, but he's also complemented by Savion Morrison and Daniel Highshaw Jr. as well. Preston, talk about the KU running back room, and do you think that's going to be the strong suit of the Kansas offense?
I mean, yes, it's going to be the strong suit. Devin Neal's back there, right? He's going to be the best running back in the Big 12, and there will only be a few. Well, okay. Ollie Gordon's going to be close, but at the same time, I do think I like Devin Neal more as a player. But, yeah, like, he's good enough to carry an entire room, and skill position-wise, he's going to get fed the ball the most. Like, there's no receiver you guys have that's like, oh, he's getting tons more catches than this receiver. Like, you spread it around fairly well, but Neal's carrying that room. And then, yeah, Highshaw's a great complimentary back. We saw didn't Neal get injured for 1 or 2 games last year, and Highshaw stepped in really well. So I think your running back room is very solid.
Yeah, and Highshaw's dealt with injuries as well, but they all have such different styles. Neal I describe as the breakout kind of running back, the guy who can break off for large yardage. But then you've got Highshaw, who is the guy who's at the line if you need to get that 1 yard goal line and prevent the stand from the defense. He's the guy that's going to push through and just get those extra couple yards because his motor is constant and his feet continue to move. Those guys all complement each other. I was talking to Devin Neal, and I was talking to all 3 of them, but Devin Neal was talking about how this room is special. And the reason why is even though they have different styles, which is amazing for them, they don't have a copycat of room that they could have in most college football worlds. But, they push each other like any college football team should, but they are very specific because like one guy goes and does a rep. This is what Neal was telling me. One guy does a rep, and as soon as he's done, the other 2 guys are helping him out, giving him advice right away, and then helping him continue to grow, and they're pushing each other because they know they're not competing for each other's positions. I mean, in some sense they are, but they know that they have different styles. They'll be used in different ways, that they're all very talented running backs. Wide receiver, I don't know if I want to call it the big 3, but definitely the top 3 receivers for Kansas football is Luke Grimm, Lawrence Arnold, and Torrey Loughlin. See, this is where this gets hard. Torrey Loughlin's right there with Quentin Skinner. So we got 4, but all of these guys are different receivers. Preston, can you take us through who you think will be kind of the standout receiver out of these guys come this season?
I've always liked Grimm, but Arnold somehow always ends up with a lot of deep catch. He ends up with the touchdowns from what I've seen. I haven't watched a ton of KU, but he seems like the red zone threat. So I like him a lot. Skinner just seems like he's been here forever. I don't know why, but I feel like I've been watching Quentin Skinner play on the Jayhawks for a while. And I'm not going to say I watch every game or anything, but I'll watch them if they're on TV. But I think Grimm's probably the number 1 target.
Yeah, and the reason why is he's able to cut across the field. So especially on play-action passes, he is the guy to go to for Jalen Daniels when he's in, especially the shotgun, sometimes in the pistol. So the thing I think is going to be interesting is which one of them produces. But honestly, they don't care. They want to push each other just like the running back room, to see who can catch the ball. The tight end room looks great with Jared Casey returning. We've got some new guys coming in, but Casey talked about how this year he was on the senior council. He talked about how he's really encouraging this team to be a player-led team. He wants it to be vocal. He said that himself he wants to be vocal as he's really pushed this fall camp to take on that leadership position. It'd be really awesome to see what he can do with Jeff Grimes, the tight end specialist. All right, I have one comment on the offensive line. We'll move on. Jeff Grimes said it's a work in progress. All right, let's move on. But no, seriously, there are a lot of discussions happening with the offensive line, a lot of missed players from last year because of the NFL draft and just general graduations. There's going to be a hole there for sure, and Kansas is going to need to fill that in some way. All right. Let's shift to the defensive side. Here's the big headline. The really, really good defensive players combined with Kenny Logan and Rich Miller. Rich Miller at the linebacker position, Logan at the safety position. They're gone. They headed off. But maybe the biggest loss is the surprise defensive end. Some may call him a linebacker, but he's a defensive end, Austin Booker, who's now with the Chicago Bears and having a great start in the preseason. It'd be amazing if he could make the team. He was a middle-round draft pick for them. So that's a lot of holes to fill. And Lance Leipold and his team have been busy in the transfer portal. But there's some people that need to step up. I think the defensive back room could look really good. I honestly do. When we were there listening to some of what Lance Leipold had to say, he was saying, man, O.J. Burrows has been incredible. If you had to name an MVP of camp, it's O.J. Burrows. And him at the safety position could really fill that hole of Kenny Logan. Man, that would be special. But, Preston, you've got somebody that most KU fans may not know about. Who do you think is going to step up for the defense this year?
Yeah, I think someone stepping up is Demarius McGehee, cornerback. He transferred in from LSU, and I think people are sleeping on him a bit. It was one of those transfers that people didn't really hear about, and I only figured it out because of EA college football, but, hey, he's there. I know him and Kobe Bryant will be a pretty solid duo, and then, over the top with Burrows and Grant is going to be super good. I like y'all's secondary. As for the defense as a whole, I don't know much about the linebacker or D-line rooms, but I know you lost a lot of depth within the last year at those two positions. So, but yeah, the secondary, if your D-line can somehow get to the opposing team's quarterback, your secondary is going to lock it down for 5 seconds. They just got to get there within 5 seconds. So
yeah, when you look at the wide receivers across the nation, you obviously got Luther Burden just a couple miles away in Columbia. But really, the wide receivers aren't as good as they were last year at a national scale. Now, obviously, Kansas cornerbacks are going to get burnt. But Kobe Bryant, he's kind of flying under the radar.
Yeah.
There's discussions about him being a first-round draft pick just a couple years ago. And one of my favorite quotes from all of them, it doesn't matter what the projections are. I got to still show up on field. Even if these guys walk out as projected 4th, 5th-round draft picks, doesn't matter until they prove it, and that also provides them with the opportunity to prove it even further and to move up their draft stock, because some of these guys are talented enough to pass this test and move on to playing on Sundays. All right, let's walk through the schedule for Kansas football. First off, just coming up real soon, Kansas football kicks off their season. If you don't already know, real quick, Kansas football will be playing 2 games at Children's Mercy Park. They're 2 home games. And 4 games at GHA Field at Arrowhead Stadium where the Chiefs play in replacement of David Booth Memorial Stadium, which is under construction. I was able to visit it. Part of my visit to Lawrence, and they're making some good progress. They're building, I believe, one of the coolest stadiums in the country. It could be, depends on the atmosphere, right? But Kansas football has something to be proud about now, and so why not build a stadium that they're proud of too? It's going to look incredible. Well, we have to wait till next season. So let's get to this season, starting off with a game at Children's Mercy Park on August 29th against Lindenwood. Kansas football trying to find their first win right away. We'll talk about that in just a second. I'll go down. They will head to Champaign after that to take on the Illini after a rematch from last year. Then they'll come back home again to Children's Mercy Park to play UNLV, a rematch of the bowl game in which Kansas won their first bowl game for quite a while. And then they go to Morgantown to face West Virginia, come back and play their first game at Arrowhead against Texas Christian University. Then they head to Arizona State, come back for Houston, head to Kansas State, come home for Iowa State, and then head to BYU and finish off the season with a game at home against Colorado and then a game away against Baylor. Packed schedule. And yes, it's not an easy conference schedule. I'd say that, Big 12, Big 10 are SEC, Big 10 are the big football conferences. Big 12 is always debating whether or not they're right there with them in some senses. But as far as Big 12 play goes, these are good teams, but these are not the best in the Big 12. Preston, first of all, just quick thoughts before we go down the list. What stands out to you about this list?
Again, I think it's super easy. I don't know. you guys got lucky. You don't have to face UCF. UCF's going to be a sneaky team with KJ Jefferson coming in from Arkansas. And then you skipped out on Utah and Arizona. Arizona technically, K-State's technically not playing a conference game against them because it was already scheduled, but they are in the conference. So you miss 3 of the top teams. You get K-State, which is good. K-State will be a top team. And you also miss Oklahoma State somehow. So I don't know what schedule makers were doing. I know they make schedules beforehand, but then you had to throw in the new teams into the conference. So it could end up biting you if you guys end up with 2 losses on the season because you won't have faced high-ranked teams. But that's just my opinion.
Yeah, it's a two-edged sword. You've got, or two-sided sword. I mean, you've got a decent schedule. You're facing a Big Ten team in Illinois, but your 2 other non-conference games are pretty simple. Lindenwood should be an easy win, but again, well, let's go to that real quick before I move into the other games. Lindenwood, what does KU have to do to not botch this?
Give Devin Neal the ball 25 times and make sure Jalen Daniels doesn't get hurt game 1. If y'all are up big at half, just pull Daniels because it's a win. But, like, if you somehow botch it as far as Neal doesn't touch the ball as much as he should or Daniels gets hurt, that will just put a damper on the entire season.
Yeah, you don't want to be the team that starts up the season with the loss. I think as long as the guys walk in with the right mentality, that's not going to be an issue. But this is kind of fall camp last day of school. This is the final exam because this is real football with real guys that want to tackle you and want to hurt you. And I think that if Kansas offense doesn't come out full-fledged, Kansas defense isn't fully ready, isn't fully scouting this team, they could be in a lot of trouble because they're going to have that test just a week later when they travel to Champaign. But yeah, that's a Big 12. That's a Big 10 matchup with Illinois. But then in the Big 12 play, I mean, yeah, you named it. 4 of the top 5 teams, Kansas doesn't have to play, which is crazy. But when people are frustrated about it, it's a cycle. It's just how it worked out. Kansas will play those teams in the near future, but it's just a setup so that teams rotate because obviously you can't play everybody in the conference. I think not playing Oklahoma State's big, but I think you're right about if Kansas moves themselves into 2 losses, it's still a great season, but if they're trying to get college football playoff level play, it's their strength of schedule is going to kill them. Now, my question for you is Kansas State Sunflower Showdown. It's usually right there at the end of the season, but man, it's smack dab right there in the middle, and I'm actually pretty surprised by that. What are your thoughts on that game, and do you think it's going to be a high? I know it's going to be a high intensity match. I know it's going to be a big environment. Kansas State always brings a great environment. But it's just the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th game of the Big 12 season for Kansas. Do you think that's going to be a huge test? And what I should say specifically is, does it set them up even better for the next 4 games because they play the most difficult team on their schedule smack dab in the middle?
Well, let me put it this way. If we get to this point and both teams are undefeated, it will be a matchup of I would say if K-State is undefeated by that point, they will be a top 8 team in football based on their schedule leading up to that. And then KU would probably end up being a top 15, somewhere in there. It's not the greatest strength of schedule, but I don't see KU being undefeated by then. But yeah, it's super, super early this year, and I don't know why they put it so early. Like, having it in October is crazy. I mean, this is the year we would want it at the end, right? Like, highest stakes, of a Sunflower Showdown yet, and it's smack dab in the middle. So I don't know why it's there, but yeah, I think it would set KU up very nicely for the rest of the season. Would definitely help out the Iowa State and BYU game, but the Colorado game, I don't know. It's a bit different because I think Colorado might get a few teams this year based on stardom. So
yeah, I mean, they just have one of the best players in the country in Travis Hunter. And obviously, Shadur Sanders is still really, really good. There's a lot of issues with that team. It's not a uber-talented team in the sense of from top to bottom, but there are some very, very talented players at the top. And I think that's going to be one of the – yeah, I agree. They could surprise some because those two guys alone can really take over a game. Here's what my thought process is. If K-State and KU play each other in the Big 12 championship, which I think is a reasonable thought, I mean, this allows for more space. But I think the biggest takeaway will be in that game, you're going to see all of the improvement that both teams have made since they had previously played. All right. Preston, hot take. I need 3 hot takes. We'll alternate. 3 hot takes between us. And the first one is going to come from me. And I'm going to say that Jalen Daniels will be the Conference Player of the Year. What are your thoughts on that?
I hate it just because Avery Johnson is in the conference. I mean, Shadur Sanders is able to be up for that, right? So Shadur's there, Travis Hunter's there. Like, if we're looking just at individual players, like, yeah. Like, Daniels could be there, maybe. But I honestly see Devin Neal getting it more than him. But there's also Ollie Gordon from Oklahoma State. So there's a lot of good players in the Big 12. Just not that, like, many well-rounded teams. Like, they've got individual players, but...
Okay. Let's get one of your hot takes.
I don't know if it's necessarily a hot take, but I think KU gets blown out versus West Virginia. I don't think that game's close. I think West Virginia takes that game by 14 or more.
Why do you think that?
I just think people are sleeping on West Virginia. Garrett Green looked really good last year towards the end of this season, and I mean, KU always shows up flat like one game out of every year, and I think West Virginia is going to be that game for them. West Virginia is a hard team to play, and I want to say, yeah, it's at West Virginia, which is a very hard spot to play in. Their crowd always shows up, so I just think that one could be a trap game for KU.
Yeah, last time they were in Morgantown, Kobe Bryant, a young corner, took a pick 6 to the house for the win, giving KU one of their first wins on their way to a bowl game, for their first bowl game in quite a while. Yeah, I mean, here's my issue with that take. I don't think they're going to get blown out because I think Lance Leipold respects his opponents too much for that to happen. And really, when you look at last season, the only real blowout that Kansas ever suffered was Texas playing them. And that was 45 minutes before the game, Jalen Daniels saying that he had a back injury. So I think that's the lone exception. I think that I do agree with you. KU always has a dud game, as in the Lance Leipold era. Last year, I'd say it's the Texas Tech game, the 16-13 game. You have an offense that's scoring 45-plus points each week, and then all of a sudden it's 13. The weather did contribute to that, but it's just one of those things that you got to look out for. All right. I got to get one more take from each of us. I know I said 3, but I want to get one more take. I'm just going to ask Preston. This is going to be the same question, but I believe Devin Neal could be a 1,000-yard rusher for sure. But I'm going to set the mark at 1,250, 1,250. I believe he can get there. What's your take on him getting to 1,250?
I would say over that, just because they don't want to use Daniels too much. They don't want to risk his injury, especially early on when you're facing these teams with like weaker defenses. I mean, first 3 weeks, Neal could. I could see Neal being at like 500 to 700 yards in the first 3 weeks. So, I think 1,250 is a very reasonable number. I would go over on that.
So, as fun as the Kansas offense is in the passing game, that rushing game is what is going to carry them to wins. It's going to be so much fun to watch this year. 12 games for Kansas football. Let's send it out with our records, our predicted records, our last thing on Kansas football, our predicted records. Preston Graber, what's your prediction on records as you look at the schedule for Kansas football this year?
There's 12 games, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Everything in me wants to say 9-3. I think that's reasonable. But I think KU drops one that I'm not counting as a loss, so I'm going to say 8-4.
8-4, picking up around the same spot as last year. I'm going to go with 10-2. I know it's more being a optimist than anything, but I would say the 2 losses is maybe that Iowa State game, maybe the BYU one, I think you could get surprised. But the other one, I agree with you. I have no idea which one it will be. I just know KU kind of has dud games sometimes. Do I think the ceiling is 12-0? Yes. Do I think if this offense is clicking and the defense figures it out with this cornerback room? Yes. I think we can go to the college football playoff. I have complete optimism. I'm not even saying that with optimism. I'm saying that with just football analytics. I believe, looking at this team and the talent it has, that it can go there. Can it win a national championship against SEC teams and Big Ten? I'm in a weird spot with that because I want to say yes, but I think this is not the year. This is probably not the year. But hey, who knows? That should be the mantra of this team this year. Who knows? Next episode, we'll be talking with Kansas State broadcaster Wyatt Thompson about previewing and preparing for this season for Kansas State football. It's going to be an epic episode, and we're extremely excited for you guys to listen to that. But this was our KU football episode. We talked all about the schedule, the offense, the defense, the coaching staff, and all of the changes and hot takes in between. Thanks so much for Preston Graber, who came on. And our quote of the day is from Albert Einstein. And it says, "Learn from yesterday, live for today, hope for tomorrow. The important thing is to not stop questioning."